This is my last presentation as a CSU employee. So I can be open. What are they going to do? Fire me? As I tell people, uniqueness of me, I've lived my entire life over the Ogallala, but it's not been Colorado. Grew up in eastern Nebraska. We had the easternmost well in the Ogallala. We beat our neighbor by 50 feet. Worked for 12 years in North Platte, Nebraska, covering mostly the southwest corner of the Republican River Basin. And then in 2000, moved here to Colorado, covering the Republican Basin in South Platte. So my major component, now it's not Northern region anymore. It's, I mean, what do we call ourselves now? Eastern Plains or something like that. Yeah, it changes. They keep sending us new name tags about every other year for our region. I got a stockpile of them. But my primary emphasis, we don't, as a regional specialist in water, we don't break apart by county lines or regions that CSU makes up. We cover basins. So I cover the entire South Platte Basin. I don't have to do much up in the mountain because there's not much ag or irrigation up there. And the Republican ends, just west of here. So I don't get into the mountains very often. So to give you a little bit of an overview on this. Ooh, I'm getting the wrong button. So on this kind of overview of the aquifer, what is the aquifer? As well as the Republican River Compact, why we have the Republican River Compact. A lot of people don't understand it. Younger generations don't understand it. Why did we negotiate away all our water? Development in Colorado, primarily in the Republican Basin, as well as water declines. What are we seeing with them scattered around the basin? So Ogallala Aquifer as a whole, 174,000 square miles, covers 8 states. And when I was working in Nebraska, the joke was the Ogallala Aquifer is Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Because Nebraska contains 2/3 of the water within the aquifer. And when you see the map, you'll see an area that really holds most of it. So it's South Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. So those are the 8 states. And in reality, the more correct name for this is it's the High Plains Aquifer. Because the formation over the entire area is not Ogallala. There's 7 formations. Why do we call it the Ogallala Aquifer? 2003, when you were at Ogallala, the first view of the formation, there's an outcropping north of town. That is the top of the Ogallala Formation. Hence, they called it the Ogallala. And they thought it went everywhere. So you got the different formations of Ogallala, which is the major, Brule, Valentine, Broadwater, Arickaree, Gering, and there's one other one, I cannot remember the name, but it's a fairly saline portion of the Ogallala. And it's very tight. So this is the map covering it. And you see Ogallala goes up into southern South Dakota, southeast Wyoming, all of the sliver of eastern Colorado, western third of Kansas, panhandle Oklahoma, panhandle of Texas down into the high plains of Texas, Lubbock area, and that. Now, like I said, why do we call it Snow White and 7 Dwarfs? The formation in Nebraska is tremendously deep. This is the Sand Hills region of Nebraska, not a very good agricultural location. Extremely fine sands, below great cattle production, but it also holds a lot of the water. They did a test well on the Goodmanson Ranch, which is north of North Platte. They ran out of drill stem before they hit the bottom of the aquifer, 2,000 feet. Colorado at one time says, well, we can buy some land up there, drill, pump water down. Nebraska said, nope, no pumping. Well, then they said, we'll put it on a rail train. Nope, no, we do not export water. Preserve it. Colorado had that same, but as part of compact compliance, they had to agree to the pipeline of exporting water. But you can see the thicknesses, the original thicknesses, pockets here and there of extreme thickness, and those are typically sandhills type regions. Now, I said I grew up on the eastern side. Can't see the county lines right. It was right in this pocket here. This is not a very good part of the aquifer. Grew up here, worked here, and now I live right there. So not quite the most western well, but we're close. at the research station. And one of the jokes on this, I'll go back to this, the people down in Texas that I knew, Bushland, Texas, the researchers there, once we get horizontal drilling figured out, well, we're going to have all the water we want when we get it to Nebraska. Fat chance. Declines. Now there's some interesting things here. Again, you see the sandhills. The wet meadows and the sandhills, that's the aquifer. That's groundwater. Streams that flow out of the Ogallala are groundwater fed. Very little runoff as a part of the total volume leaving. The South Platte, right, cuts it out right in here through the northeast corner of Colorado, and really doesn't reconnect with the Ogallala until you get to that very far corner. This is an alluvial aquifer through this system that is not connected north or south. There's putting in a data center, or planning to put a data center in north of Sterling. All of a sudden emails. Oh God, they're going to drain all our water down here. Yuma Ray area said, fat chance. We're not connected. We'll never drain our aquifer here. Because hydrogeologically, we aren't connected. So we got to worry about geology, hydrology, and those aspects when we keep talking about where the water comes from. So them pumping in that area has no impact on us. Now, get closer in here to the Ogallala Aquifer, saturated thicknesses. You can primarily see here in Yuma County, Southern Phillips, high volume of water, a little bit more water down here towards Burlington area. These were the primary first developments. With development comes declines. We just don't have enough creeks up here to support the number of wells that we have. Too many straws in the cup. And we'll talk a little bit more about declines here a little bit later. But 1942 compact started a lot of things. Why? Why was the compact negotiated? People within the basin wanted flood control reservoirs to protect themselves, to reduce flooding impacts. To get that compact negotiated, the three states had to agree to what the split of water was. And it was all surface water flows at the time. We didn't know what we were sitting on back in 1942, the volume of water. So it was strictly surface water flows at that time. And Colorado got 11%, Nebraska has 51%, Kansas has the remaining. The compact was negotiated 1935 Republican River flood. Anybody remember that? I knew people that lived through it. And that was the horror story for them. That's why they wanted the compact. If you go into the 35 flood, 100 people lost their lives. They never found everybody. There's still people buried within the basin that they never found. The storm, height of the Dust Bowl, 1935. Everybody talks about 35 in the Southern Plains, how dry it was, the Dust Bowl, dirt blowing. And I believe, wasn't it 35 when it blew into Washington, D.C.? Well, everybody goes, well, how do you have a flood in a major drought? Well, we're on the northern portion of that Dust Bowl. Late April, early May of that year, rains returned, saturated the ground conditions. On May 30th and to June 2nd, 1935, anywhere between 9 and 24 inches fell within the basin. The highest recorded rainfall event is north of Vona. That's the 24 inches. How'd they record it? A dry cattle tank was overflowing, and the cattle tank was 24 inches tall. Estimates are that it was 30 inches, but they're estimates. But the highest recorded is in that 24-inch range, north of Vona, overnight. What happens when you have 24 inches fall in less than 24 hours? A flood. So that was the start of it. And you know, like with everything, it all flows downhill. Although today I can't say water flows downhill. Flows the money in Colorado. Whoever has the deepest pocketbook wins. So a reported wall of water flowing down the river, anywhere from 2 to 8 feet tall. Now I'll go back to this. Houses were floating down the river with people on top. One of the people we had working for us when I was in North Platte grew up just north of Binkelman. They got the call. They did have phone lines in 1935 there. He got the call. and he was young, says, "Get your butts down here. We need help." You know, they barely had any rain right there where he lived, and they were kind of like, "What the hell's going on?" Pardon me, my language. When they topped the hill, they saw a house floating down the river, 2 neighbors on top. They never found them. So you can imagine the hysteria and the horror of watching people you know lose their lives and say, "What can we do to stop this?" Here's pictures of what the damage down the Republican. So it took that effort to get the compact and for flood control, not knowing well what we had underneath of us. 8 reservoirs were developed as a result of that. Bonnie Reservoir in Colorado, and then 5 in Nebraska and 2 in Kansas. That's part of our compact. We have measuring devices at the state line by Ray, measure our water usage. There's another one where South Fork comes in at Dinkelman, and that's the only 2 that really matter for Colorado. There's another one down the state line in Nebraska, but those are the measuring devices. That's what runs the compact, getting water across those flumes. So 30% of Republican basins within Colorado, we got 11% of the water because that's what was flowing through the state line. Most of the basin doesn't have flowing water most of the time. Compact distributed the water to 11%, and groundwater was never mentioned in the compact in 1942 until the water master said groundwater will be involved in 2002. Neither Nebraska nor Kansas or Colorado recognized groundwater in the compact, or that groundwater and surface water were hydraulically connected at that point. So you can see what all happened. Prior 42, predominantly just stream diversions. After reservoir construction, there was some reservoir built irrigation in Colorado below Bonnie. Not much, because what are we, 4 miles from the state line at Bonnie? Bonnie was drained in 2008-ish to meet compact compliance. Because one of the things with compact compliance, we ate all 8,000 acre feet of evaporative losses off of Bonnie. And our consumptive use was roughly 18,000 acre feet for the new compact. How do you manage water and groundwater for that? And the 3 primary in order of the reservoirs: flood control, irrigation, recreation. And recreation is down the way. Unfortunately, we have to drain it, but that's what we have to do. A lot of people came out of the woods at that point, 2008. Why are we draining this? I go, where were you the last 6 years in compact negotiations, meetings, all those things? Until it impacted what they wanted to do, their head was in the ground like an ostrich. So it's kind of one of those things. And Kansas refused to say, we'll negate that 8,000 acre feet of evaporative losses to save the reservoir, because they knew they'd get more water. They won't admit it, but that's what the reasoning is. So at the time of the compact, technology is limited for deep water pumping in a significant capacity. Large-scale irrigation was never thought of. It was hand-moved pipe at that time. That had a lot of problems. We have topography here, so for irrigation it was very limited. How do you pump water down to 2, 3, 4, 5% slope and make it stay, not erode? 1947, the developer of the center pivot, Frank Zyback, designer, and first towable system. It was one that went round and around, but it sat in one spot, then you towed it to the next spot, and towed it. 1949, he developed the first self-propelled irrigation system. It was a water drive system. So it took a lot of pressure, and it did not like topography. It preferred flat ground again. First patent in 1954. So this set off irrigation around the world like an explosion, this development. Depending upon who you talk to, it's the #1 intervention or invention in agricultural history, but it's always in the top 5 of lists. He lived in Columbus, Nebraska, 70 miles from where I grew up. I have relatives in Columbus. Patent was sold to Valley Irrigation out of Valley, Nebraska. They worked out of their garage for the first several years building these things until they got money to build so they can start their deal. Valmont is a worldwide company. Water drive systems, limitations, required high pressure at the time to run the water drive systems. And plus, everybody had high pressure impacts. We didn't have the technology today. Could not handle terrain. I think I knew a bunch of these, and the biggest slope that I ever saw on one was probably about 3% because they could not handle it. For anxiety back, I said, grew up near Columbus. Where was the first center pivot located? Nope. Nope. Valley? Nope. Strasburg, Colorado. Somewhere around Strasburg. Still got Colorado part of the history. Somewhere 138 miles west of Burlington on the interstate, along the interstate. So we were part of this history, early history. So major development occurred late 60s through the early 80s, especially when we would develop deep turbine wells, the technology for that. At that point, Colorado was limited permits. By the 1980s, they started limiting permits. They knew what they had, knew what the problems were. At that point, peak development, approximately 4,000 irrigation wells, 550,000 irrigated acres in the Ogallala Formation in Colorado. Or I should say the High Plains District, because there's a little bit in southern Colorado. Slow declines continued but we started after the compact or the renegotiation of the lawsuit, Colorado started retiring acres at that point. Programs, and they were primarily targeting close to rivers, fastest impact at that point. We also now have the South Fork, what is it, 29,000 acres they're supposed to be retired by 2029. They think they're on progress, but maybe that progress will improve with prices today, unfortunately. One of the things, being in eastern Colorado, dealing with eastern water, and it's my biggest gripe with the state and the university, what's the major emphasis of water in Colorado? Colorado River Basin. Look at the economics of irrigation and agriculture to the state. I have stood on my soapbox until I'm hoarse, but it makes no difference. I'll give you a little more perspective. The top 4 counties in the Republican Basin: Phillips, Washington, Yuma, Kit Carson. They're all within the top 8, or no, 9 counties in the state of Colorado. Are there any counties west of the divide in the top 10? Now, I understand we want to keep agriculture in western Colorado. It's part of their life. They have the water. But where the money is being spent. And we're dealing on South Platte, we're dealing with buy and dry, we're dealing with declines and the research. I mean, we have ideas, but we don't have money to put them out there. And demonstrations, research, and all those things. Go back to declines. I want to have that in there. Oh, one thing I was going to say, those 4 counties in eastern Colorado are $2.2 billion roughly agricultural output. That's 27%. The western slope is 27% of those 4 counties. Now I know it's important, regional, for them, those economics, but when you look at the state, and the number 2 industry in the state behind tourism. So back to this, we're going to talk about declines. This is our well at Akron. Been measured since 1975. It was put in 69 when we started doing irrigation research at the station. As you can see, we weren't doing a lot of irrigation. We were actually increasing in depth slightly And here's where we start putting in more irrigation technology and doing more work. We're down about 2 feet from the original pipe reading in 50 years. That's not a bunch, 2 feet. And what's interesting here is I took over all that work right about here. Right in here, I realized what we were doing. We were declining. I made the decision, we're restricting irrigation. We're doing more limited water. We're doing more dry land work. We're going to cut how much water we pump. I did not want to be known as the guy who killed research at Akron, Colorado. And here the last 4 years, with those management practices and limitations, we've stabilized. Now remember, Akron, closest irrigation well, probably close to 15 miles away. So we have that area to ourselves, except for 2 feedlots and the town of Akron that pumps out of the Ogallala. We're not dense area. And we also, the lowest precipitation area within there. Just north of Burlington here, well depth is 346 feet. Now, that doesn't mean that's the bottom of the aquifer. That's just the bottom of the well. They started out, sorry, that's hard to read here. Around 200 feet back in the 1960s, they have drawn down 59 feet since 1960. Another one up by Ray, north of Ray. Look at this. It's in the sand hills, shallower water. They were about 60, 70 feet of groundwater at the beginning. They're down to 120 feet, 78-foot drawdown. They have a well casing to 345 feet. They got a lot of water there, but it's declining. And I will say this, all of the rivers in Republican River Basin are drains for the aquifer. If you see water flowing without a major rainfall event, that's groundwater. Go back to another one by Ray. Well depth is 91 feet. This is close to the state line. I can't really doubt that's the bottom of the aquifer there, but you can see the impact of pumping. They were at 20 feet, they're now at 90 feet or 30 feet. Draw down to 66 feet. They have 2 feet of water left in that well. You can't support irrigation. Maybe a small household, but that's the problem. I don't know what the aquifer thickness is right in that area. That may be the bottom, but I doubt it. That's just what they've drilled to. Holyoke, again, they've drawn down 266 feet was the bottom of the well, 74-foot drawdown. One more up by Yuma, 392 feet, bottom of the well, 86-foot drawdown. So we're seeing consistent drawdowns for most locations. Now, the periphery of the aquifer, most of those wells have reduced capacities over the years. Some of them are drying up. A lot are drying up because they don't have the capacity to irrigate. So it'll take care of itself eventually, but what's the impact? Well, there's enough there for households. You never pump a well dry unless it's not dry enough to stop household use, but unless it's the deepest well out there and you suck everybody dry, which does happen. It's not cheap drilling wells. So declining groundwater levels are impacting stream flows because the streams are our drain for this aquifer. Everybody goes like, well, we're connected to the mountains. No, we aren't. Not even close. The South Platte's taking all that water. And the hydrologically, how many people know Akron, Colorado? Driven through the town. Drive west on 34, not Big Hill, just west of town. That is the end of the aquifer. That's an uplift. A lot of the aquifer falls to the Palmer Formation. That's a part of the Palmer Formation. That's the end of the aquifer. Then we start another aquifer on the other side, and they are not hydrologically connected. So, recorded stream flows. History. Like I said, this is pre-development at the North Fork, 36,000 acre feet every year crossing line. Starting in the 1960s, you can see that decline over time. Impact of irrigation. That's one of them. As we get further into history with time with agriculture, I'll talk about another one. But, and the orange bars here are what we're pumping out of the well field north array to meet compact compliance. It's a Band-Aid, temporary Band-Aid. But it gets us a time period where we can make more connections and regulations if people are willing. And it's not going to be an easy thing. It's going to be economically hard, management hard decisions. But it's a Band-Aid to get us there. Now they're talking about drilling more wells up there, feeding it to meet the needs. Because we know by studies that capacity is not going to meet future needs as we keep declining in the aquifer. Groundwater management, has managed decline, has always been. 25% reduction in 100 years. We're not quite there overall. Compact compliance limits, what we can do. Groundwater declines limit stream flow. We're not like the South Platte, the Colorado, get all the snowpack. We live and die by snowpack. We live and die by precipitation is one. And we know we're in a semi-arid region. 2004, the Republican River Water Conservation District was started. Local control was the mandate. They started with well retirements paid by federal, state, and local funds. They instituted a fee for irrigated acres that would help pay for retirements as well as building a pipeline. Continued retirements to meet compliance. It's like the slow death of 100 cuts of the keep retiring. But it's the easiest way. But it will not meet future needs. Are these enough to meet compact compliance into the future? Irrigation, I says, is the main driver. Irrigated crops, feedlots, dairies. We've built for that. So is Kansas. So is Nebraska. So is Oklahoma. So is Texas. We are the meat capital of the United States. And why is that? The climate. We don't generally have to fight mud like they do back east. Where do we go in the future? Allocations. They're talking about pay for pumping. Set you to a certain location. If you want to pump more, you pay higher fees. It's a way of influencing your thought process. There are areas that have started kind of trying to limit irrigation. Kansas is the Limas. I think we have somebody talking about those. Fantastic idea. The original, though, Upper Republican NRD, started in 1978 or 79. They started instituting restrictions on pumping. It was high, but they said, we want to start out. And why did they do that? Because they know the pumping was more than twice what the aquifer could sustain. 1978 published study said those three counties, the sustainable pumping allocation was 6 inches. Now we're west, we're drier. We're not quite as dense in areas with irrigation. So what's the prescribed allocation to maintain pumping eventually? So we go through there. So I'm going to get a little bit on a soapbox. How much time do I have left? 15 minutes. We'll save some time for questions because unfortunately, as soon as I'm done, I have to hop out. I have to be in Fort Collins this afternoon. Double booked myself. What a way to do it on your second to last day.
They didn't know about the underground
water. You will never break it. All 3 states have to agree to it. Will Kansas agree? Oh, they are lying. If they were Pinocchio, that would be across the state line and into probably close to Manhattan. The reason, and here's the reason. I knew reasoning back in the 90s. They have a water quality issue down in the lower part of the basin. The solution to pollution is dilution. They want more water. North of Manhattan area. That's where the Republican goes. Close to Manhattan. There's a reservoir just right north of them. Let's go back and find that. If I can find where those reservoirs were at. Yeah, I know. There we go. This reservoir, Milford, last reservoir. That's just north of Manhattan area. Yeah, I drive Highway 77 from Lincoln to south of Kansas. I go right by it. Then you go through Manhattan. Somewhere in that area, they are having issues with water quality meeting EPA standards. It's recorded. We figured that out back in the 90s when the lawsuit started. They want the water. Because we talked to, here's money. Nope. Here's this. Nope. And when they finished the Arkansas litigation, I can't remember what year that was, early 2000s exactly. Kansas kept demanding water, water, water. Well, they settled for money. And knowing people back there, and in certain, I'll never say names, I said, why did you take money when you wanted water? We're going to use that on the litigation for the Republican. Get the water there. Because our population is centered in Northeast Colorado or Kansas. We want water. That was the underlying theme the entire time. So you got to know who you're talking to.
It wasn't that, so we didn't have to take up so much water.
Oh, it was known, but the states did not legally recognize groundwater surface water connection at that point. Yeah. And until that was stated, everybody said the Ogallala Aquifer is not stream flow. Now, here's one of the other things, and this will get people upset. There was, and this study was shut off because of the research or because of litigation on the Republic. They decided we need to know what the true impacts of irrigation is versus new land conservation practices. Terracing, no-till, all these things being done. This is not, dryland farmers are not going to be happy. Irrigation and dryland practices, new improved farming practices, were all almost equal to impacting stream flows. Because what does terrace do? Hold water, to stop it from getting back to the river. What were the practices of farming back in the 1940s? Full tillage, one crop every 2 years. What are we today in dryland? Or runoff, because we stopped and basically killed infiltration with moldboard plowing. Yeah, but that has the impact. We're stopping and slowing the water from making it back to the river on those high precipitation events. And it's staying on the ground, infiltrating, and now that allowed us in some of those areas to grow 2 crops every 3 years, 3 crops out of 4 with farm management practices. We're using that water to grow crops, and it's not getting back to the aquifer. It's not getting back to the river in a way. So irrigation is not the total devil in this. It's all practice. But how do you tell a farmer, hey, you have to go back to moldboard plowing. We're going to start the Dust Bowl years again. How would that look to a state agency?
Sure. They spent so much money out there on the river trying to figure out how to open it up and get the water down there, and they never did ever do it.
Mm-hmm.
You take out there, you come down to 85, the water's backing up, back in those straws and stuff that, the guy back over there got full of the water he don't need on his land. So why can't that get down into the river? Why didn't we ever do that? Why didn't we put it in the river and take it down? Come on.
It gets, well, you're reportioning between sub-districts off of that. And there is that, okay, you're on 385 South Idaho. Yeah, that is a natural wetland. Always has been, from what the records I can find. That little area on the right-hand side of the west side of the highway, right where it goes, the river goes into the aquifer. That's a natural, yeah, right west of Bonnie.
Well, and
It's still, I'd have, there are culverts right there underneath. I'd have to go look, but, and there's a bridge, but there's also culverts in a couple other spots. But the water's, that's just a natural wetland. I've talked to people that are in there. I yeah, this has always been like this as far as I ever lived. They were like 80 years old at the time. Yeah, yeah. 5 minutes, 10. Oh, we got time for a few more questions and soapbox. Now they're keep talking about reductions, and I've heard them. There's groups that say, well, if we do a 20% reduction of irrigation, that'll meet all the needs. They don't understand the complications. 20% will not come close to making this aquifer sustainable. Remember what I said about Nebraska's estimate in the upper Republican? I mean, more than that. We don't know. They have not allowed that study. That's can't, yeah. Well, Q stable is very similar to what they did in 70. They reported in 78 for the upper Republican. The talk has been around, but people do not want to know. But doing my engineering math and hydraulics and all that, because I know as you cut irrigation down, what happens to the stored soil moisture at the end of the year? Maybe you can answer me. If you can't apply all the water you need till the end of the year, what happens to the stored soil moisture? It's going to be less.
Yeah.
You have to recharge that back up. It's this continuing effect that they're not accounting for. When they keep saying, well, if we cut 20%, that'll take care of it. Well, first of all, under normal farmer management practices, 10 to 20% we can cut back without a problem, still maintain fully irrigated yields. Just by better management. That's been proven. I've done it. People call me nuts. Oh, I'm a great manager. Well, let's get through it. And they're like, how do you do it? Using ET scheduling, knowing my soil moistures, all these things. But they don't like doing that. They want to pay somebody to put the monitors in, soil moisture monitors in. Had a call one year. There was a project by a certain agency, I will not say. They put in soil moisture monitoring equipment. This damn thing stay wet all year long. What's going on? Walk out there. I go, well, you got it in a stinking hole, and the way he's irrigating, water's all running down to this spot, so it's always going to stay wet. You know, irrigation technology. The drops in here work great in Texas. They don't work here until you get low enough capacities. I can talk about that. I did a 2-hour presentation to producers on all the engineering aspects that it takes to design an irrigation system. And they were all walking out, what in the heck did we do? Because the drops are not substantially reducing evaporation. Drops 2-3 feet off the ground. It's at trust level. That pipeline is to dump in the North Fork of the Republican to meet compact compliance. They're pumping at what? Anywhere from 10 to 15 miles north of Ray, pipeline it to just right before that flume at the state line, measuring device at the state line, because they didn't want people gathering that water. Now I know this is going to makes people mad when I say, but hey, the truth hurts sometimes. And I tell you, in the western half of the United States, yeah, they account for it in Meade and Powell, all those reservoirs. With that, thank you very much. And I have to boot, scoot, and boogie.